Got it.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Leah, for such a beautiful introduction. We should have recorded the introduction. That would have been fun. So there's always a bit of nerves. So we're going to be talking about 2022, but getting a big perspective on the times that we're going through. I want to thank the Comox Valley Jung Society and Leah and Alan and Sheila for continuing to have me on. This is a great honor, and I miss those times where we spent these evenings together, and I know they're coming back eventually, so it'll be nice. But also, I'm grateful for all my friends showing up. New friends and old friends, and yes, please don't hesitate to connect with me. I'm going to be showing you some ways of connecting. Today's lecture, of course, I always feed on personal connections during the lectures when they're in person, and relating to a screen is much different. So I'm going to do my best, and I have a PowerPoint presentation that I will show you to keep you all going there. And so I don't know why I keep seeing you and not me, but that's okay. Here we go. Share. All right, so here we go. Deuces are wild, an archetypal perspective to our changing times. I almost renamed the workshop The Astrology of the Great Reset. And we have so much material here today that I could easily do a whole weekend workshop, and I probably will treat the material in that way as we move forward. So we have an introduction to the lecture where we're going to talk about Jung's work. Part one, we're going to talk about, we're going to set the scene. How did we get here? And for those of you who have seen my work before and who have heard me lecture before, especially pre-COVID, I was talking about the big breakdown that was going on, and as an astrologer, we've been seeing this crisis coming for quite a while. So we're going to look at everything leading to the crisis and how did it go, or how did it develop, and what the deeper meaning of it is. Then in part two, we're going to look at 2020 and 2021, and we're going to look at the Saturn Pluto conjunction, the Jupiter Pluto conjunctions, then the Saturn Jupiter conjunctions, and then the Saturn Uranus squares. And I have quite a few charts to show you of those 2 years. And then part three, 2022 and beyond, we're going to look at some charts of the year ahead, and we're going to get some insight into what to expect. So here we go. So if you've seen me lecturing before, you've seen this quote before. This is a long quote, and I'm going to get rid of all of those pictures. So what is an astrologer doing lecturing on a Jung society, and what is why is Jung so important to an astrologer? Jung is a multifaceted individual in his ability to study, and his curiosity, and his engagement with all forms of body of knowledge was phenomenal. Jung was more of a student than he was a teacher, although the student is usually becomes the better teacher, right? Or somebody said once, how can you tell who the teacher is in a room? Well, it's the one who's learning the most. And so in that sense, Jung's ability to study and to grasp the perspective of history into his work as a doctor was really important. So this is a quote from the Flying Saucers essays in volume 10 of the collected works. And it's one of my favorite one. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it to you. And then you can read it as we go along. And the reason I like to quote the whole thing is because we capture really the essence of who Jung is. Jung is in this. It is not a presumption that drives me, but my conscience as a psychiatrist that bids me to fulfill my duty and prepare those few who will hear me for the coming events that are in accord with the end of an era. So a big part of Jung's work was to prepare us for these crises that we've been going through. And of course, he also lived through quite a few of them, 2 world wars and the economic crash. And he was, died in 1962. So he saw the rising of the Iron Curtain and all that meant, the Cold War. He got to see all of that and got to comment extensively on it. And so he talks about, so as we know from Egyptian history, there are manifestations of psychic changes which always appear at the end of one Platonic month and at the beginning of another. Apparently, there are changes in the constellation of psychic dominance of the archetypes or gods, as they used to be called, which bring about or accompany long-lasting transformation of the collective psyche. This transformation started in the historical era and left its trace first in the passing of the Eon of Taurus into that of Aries, and then of Aries into Pisces, whose beginning coincides with the rise of Christianity. We are now nearing that great change which may be expected when the spring point enters Aquarius. So Jung was the first one to speak of the age of Aquarius. And he spoke of these psychic changes, so the archetypes that occur each change of era, a change of age. And so in his work, Jung talked about these great changes that were starting to take place, and this current crisis, but also, this whole beginning of the 20th century. It's all about the 21st century. It's all about these great changes that we're going through. So it would be frivolous of me to try to conceal from the reader that such reflections are not only exceedingly unpopular, but even come perilously close to those turbid fantasies which becloud the minds of world reformers and other interpreters of signs and portents. So he's trying to, he's separating himself from the role of being an astrologer or someone who would predict what's going on. But I must take the risk, even if it means putting my hard-won reputation for truthfulness, reliability, and capacity for scientific judgment in jeopardy. I can assure my readers that I do not do this with a light heart. I am, to be quite frank, concerned for all those who are caught unprepared by the events in question and disconcerted by their incomprehensible nature. Since, so far as I know, no one has yet been moved to examine and set forth possible psychic consequences of this foreseeable astrological change, I deem it my duty to do what I can in this respect. I undertake this thankless task in the expectation that my chisel will make no impression on the hard stone it encounters. And that's, kind of, Jung's frustration in doing, in the psychic changes that are going on, in that he felt really greatly frustrated that nobody would take him seriously. And that's why Jung didn't really talk about astrology so much in his work, and didn't really want to be known as a mystic, wanted to be known as a scientist. And so his challenges were really real in that way. And this quote here is from an essay that you all should read. That's The Undiscovered Self. I'll share that with you in my next slide here, but this is a famous quote as well. A mood of universal destruction and renewal has set its mark on our age. This mood makes itself felt everywhere, politically, socially, and philosophically. We are living in what the Greeks called the kairos, the right moment for a metamorphosis of the gods, of the fundamental principles and symbols. This peculiarity of our times, which is certainly not of our conscious choosing, is the expression of the unconscious human within us who is changing. Coming generations will have to take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science. So much is at stake, and so much depends on the psychological constitution of the modern human. So if you're interested in these things, I recommend 3 softbound books that are really easy to get. The Secret of the Golden Flower is a beautiful book on Chinese yoga and meditation. And in this commentary, Jung really gets into this, what he calls a collective psychosis, and what are the situations that create such crisis, and also how to avoid them in your own individuality. Very beautiful book. This was printed in the 1930s, and it's never been out of print. The Secret of the Golden Flower. Modern Man in Search of a Soul, also a little paperback. Phenomenal work. And then C.G. Jung's The Undiscovered Self. The second half is The Symbols and Interpretation of Dreams. I have a YouTube series on my channel that we read and discuss through the whole essay. And so it's kind of a study group. So you're welcome to look at that up, but that is probably one of his most important essays. And so you visit The Healer and the Dreamer Astrology for that on YouTube. Okay, so we're done with part, and then I'm going to give you a break of, and then here we go. So blah blah blah. That was a lot of text. So then how did we get to this crisis? So we're going to set the scene astrologically speaking, and in setting the scene, and then I'm going to move the planets so that you can see them. So I don't have all the planets on the table right now. I just have the outer planets. So the outer planets, they are what we call transpersonal planets. So Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, they're known as the personal planets. They govern my own psychophysical nature and how I interface with the world. The transpersonal planets, they govern the collective as an individual. So in the movement of these outer planets, whole generations are affected by these planets. And these planets are not visible to the naked eye, and they were discovered one after the other as the modern age began and as the rise of technology began. So we're going to look at these archetypes, and we're going to talk about them, and we're going to define them. And then as we go along in this talk, we're going to be exploring them in conjunction with each other. So I'll start with Pluto, because Pluto is the furthest away. And so Pluto is the archetype well, in the Greeks called it Hades, or Hades being hell. Pluto in Latin means riches. Mm. Affectionately, I call the Pluto the rage of the Great Mother. It is that which is dying within me so that I can be reborn to a higher octave of expression of my true self. So Pluto is death and rebirth, it's transformation. It is also power, the ultimate power source. And so wherever Pluto is, it moves really slowly. And as Pluto moves, it usually brings death and rebirth in one sense or the other. So as Pluto transits through your natal chart, where Pluto is in your own chart, and how Pluto interacts with all the other transiting planets, sets up kind of a relationship with this this transformation deity, this great transformer that Pluto is. So that's death and rebirth. And so Pluto in our recent time just entered into Capricorn in 2008. Capricorn is the structures that make our lives go. You know, Capricorn is about setting structures that last. It's about the cities, and it's about creating form. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. Saturn is the taskmaster. So Capricorn is really concerned with giving form to society. So when Pluto came in to Capricorn, then we had the crash of 2008. And as Pluto traveled through Capricorn, we've had many great tests to this Capricornian, you know, ideal and very old way of thinking, patriarchal way of thinking, through 2010, 2012, and leading to 2020. So, and then as 2020 came about, and then what's happening with Pluto is that in 2023, it comes into Aquarius. So we've had about 14, 15 years of Pluto in Capricorn, and we're going to look more at that. So that's Pluto. And then we're going to look at Uranus. Uranus now is in Taurus. So Pluto takes 260 years to go around the zodiac. So the last time Pluto was in Capricorn and moving into Aquarius, that was right at the time of the American Revolution and the French Revolution. So the last time that Pluto was in Capricorn, right at the end of Capricorn, 1767 was the Declaration of Independence, right? And so at that time, Pluto was at 27 degrees of Capricorn. And so now Pluto is returning to that point, and a lot of astrologers are talking about how important it is. And then when Pluto moved into Aquarius, then there was the French Revolution. And so that's just to give you kind of an idea of what that feels like in terms of this transition, or the last time we saw Pluto moving from Capricorn into Aquarius. Uranus and Taurus, Uranus is the great revolutionary. So we know of Gaia. Gaia is Mother Earth, and Uranus, the sky god, was the husband, son. He was the son of Gaia, but he was also her husband. And together they gave birth to the Titans and the Cyclopes, and the Titans became the gods eventually. And so this is, you know, pre Hellenistic times, pre before the Greek gods really became formed. We had the sky gods Uranus and Gaia, who were the Lord of the universe, and who, very much like in Christian mythology, were the forefathers. And so the sky god Uranus was also identified. Liz Green and Richard Tarnas talked to him, identify him with the myth of Persephone. I'm sorry, hello, Prometheus. The myth of Prometheus being the light bringer. And so Uranus was discovered right at the time of Pluto, and right at the time of the American Revolution, when Herschel made the first telescope and saw Uranus. And so Uranus is identified with technology and with science, and with the arts, and within bringing light to humanity. Prometheus had a great gift for bringing light. So then Uranus is the light bringer, and Pluto is the lord of hell. And so we're concerned, or what we were concerned about in 2008, and what we were talking about in terms of the crisis, is we looked at the square that happened between Uranus and Pluto. The square of Uranus and Pluto came into orb around 2008. And at the time of 2020, Uranus moved out into Taurus. But before that, Uranus and Pluto had been an exact square. So we had Uranus being the revolutionary and Pluto being the lord of death and rebirth. And from the Aries Capricorn, from the cardinal sign, this crisis that we have right now, really, we were talking about it leading to this time. But also it's good to remember that, when 2008 came about, and the crash, actually, that's when my opera house went bankrupt, is when when Pluto came into Capricorn, and when the Uranus-Pluto square started being in square to each other. And so, and by the time, so that great crash brought about, if you remember, by 2010, 2012, where there are all kinds of pushback. We called them the 1%, and people started wearing masks, anonymous masks, and putting down the 1%, and looking at all of the social and environmental, economic structures to kind of blame it. And this tension started happening at the early part of the second decade of the third millennium. Yeah, that's right, 21st century. We having this tension of, like one of the popular thing, or one of the realizations that we had, around 2012 is, 2014, there was some really powerful alignments then, and we were thinking, wow, maybe the hippies were right after all. Maybe we are ruining the environment. Maybe we ought to, chill out a little bit and not work so hard. And that, we're creating a world that's really, really difficult to live in, and that has consequences. So the consequences of our materialistic point of view really started to become questions. So Pluto and Capricorn in square to Uranus and Pluto. Now, to understand that a little bit better, we have to look back into history. And when was Uranus and Pluto engaged in squares before, or in alignment before? And so what we find is that 1960 to 1972, Uranus and Pluto were in conjunction in Virgo, started in Leo and then moved into Virgo. And so then we had a Uranus-Pluto conjunction from 1962 to 1972, 1960 to 1972. The time before that was 1928 to 1940. So we, and that's what we were talking about pre-COVID, is this tension of the Uranus Pluto. This is a recurring pattern, and it's been coming over and over again. We've been living through it over and over again. And from World War II and the great economic crisis to the 1960s, and then to the decade, the second decade of the 21st century, those three seasons are very, very similar. So again, to give it in a greater context, and again, we could talk a lot more about that. I have to be conscious of time, but so that's Uranus Pluto square is really important. And so we're going to talk about this when we start in the second part, when we start looking at charts, that Saturn Pluto square. The other really important alignment that occurred leading to this crisis is the conjunction of Uranus and Neptune in Capricorn, Aquarius. So from 1988 to 2000, we had Uranus in conjunction with Neptune. We haven't introduced Neptune. Neptune is the great redeemer, the great dissolver. Neptune seeks redemption, seeks to free oneself from the pain of material existence at whatever cost that might be. So Neptune rules the drunk in the gutter and the saint meditating on the Himalayas. Those two people, they're both trying to let go of the material world. And so Neptune is about this experience of the divine that frees me from the pain of material existence, but it is also whatever means I can do to merge into the other and to not experience pain or suffering. So Neptune is very mystical, but it's also very codependent. And Uranus is the light bringer, but also it's the pain that one gets, or has to suffer from, pushing the envelope so much. In the myth of Prometheus, because he stole fire from the heavens, he got nailed to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, and every morning an eagle would come and eat his liver, and his liver would grow back at night, and then the next morning the eagle would come and eat his liver again. So there's a great price that one has to pay for being a light bringer. And so that is the curse, so there's every planet has a shadow and a light. So when the Uranus-Neptune conjunction came about, the whole Iron Curtain came to naught. The Berlin Wall came down, and the Soviet Union came dissolved, and there was a tremendous optimism in the world, and that was the beginning of mysticism. The shamanic cultures, the curiosity, and it was also the rise of computer technology. We got our first computers, the cell phones were going on. There was an amazing awakening of technology and an amazing growth. Also, the people were born in those generations from 1988 to 2000. They have that Uranus-Neptune conjunction, and that Uranus-Neptune conjunction is the mystical revolutionary. It's a signature of the mystical revolutionary, but it's also on the shadow side of it, it's also getting lost into technology. Neptune being the great fog of drug addiction and of getting, not wanting to be in the world, and technology, escaping the world through technology. And so that Uranus-Neptune, brought, and I think that that's really important to note, that leading to this great crisis, we had the 1960s Uranus Pluto conjunction. Then 2008 to 2020, we had the Uranus Pluto square, and then that Uranus Neptune conjunction. And we're going to see that later on as we move along in the material, that these three planets are going to be very much part of our future, and we're going to look at them. So we talked about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And so Neptune now is in Pisces, and Uranus is in Taurus. And we'll look at them through charts here. And how are we all doing, you guys? I'm bombarding you with a lot of information and I don't get to see any feedback. So I trust that I'm not going too fast.
They can put questions in the chat box if you want, or is there anything pressing?
I won't be able to look at
No. I'll track that. And
I'm just going to trust that everybody's going well. And now I'm going to go back to sharing the screen.
Okay, sounds good.
Bam. Okay, so we did part one. So the great axial alignments of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, the Uranus-Neptune conjunction, and the spiritual quest of the new millennium. That's kind of how the new millennium started, is with that Uranus-Neptune conjunction. And then we looked at the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, and we looked at the waxing square. So that's 2008 to 2020. So that's kind of setting the tone for. So now we come to part two. And now we're going to go through a lot of charts. And so for those of you who are new to astrology, bear with us, but we're going to look at so again, we looked at Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and we're going to see these in the chart, and I'll pointing them out to you. And then we'll also look at Jupiter and Saturn. So I'll take a little break and explain to you about Saturn and Jupiter as we move along. But here we go. Here we go. So as an astrologer, I started my practice right after the Opera House went down in 2010. I started doing readings in Williams Lake. And then we were talking about that Uranus-Pluto. So if you see the Uranus-Pluto, so you got Pluto over here, and you got Uranus and square. So, and then I did a big tour, and I think I talked to the Jung Society that fall, and we were talking about, how 2020 was going to be quite a moving year. I think I did 35 workshops that fall leading to the winter of 2020. And this is what we were talking about, this conjunction of Saturn and Pluto. And we see also Jupiter. So Jupiter and Saturn, and we're going to be talking a lot about Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn are personal planets. Jupiter is my faith and my hope, what I want to become when I grow up. And Saturn is the discipline that I need to get there. It's the timekeeper, the grim reaper. It is this dark side of mastery where we have to put work into it. And Saturn always pushes us through his transits to become all that we are. And Jupiter kind of sets the bar. Now, Jupiter and Pluto and Saturn come into conjunction every 20 years, and that's called the maxima conionctio. And in this chart, Jupiter and Saturn are coming to a conjunction. But first, we have Saturn, Pluto, we have Mercury and the Sun, and we have an opposition. And that, we kind of felt that was the real, was going to be a very meaningful time. Now, then we add the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. So Saturn moves out. So in 2020, Saturn moves out into Aquarius, and Jupiter and Pluto come into conjunction. And again, they're all in square to Uranus. So really, yeah, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Mars, all forming this quadruple conjunction in square to Uranus, April 2020. So, the crisis was just beginning, with the January 10th. And then by April 5th, then we're full on crisis. And that's mirrored by that Jupiter Pluto. Now, Jupiter Pluto comes into conjunction with, happens in terms of a conjunction, it happens every 12, 14 years. What makes this Jupiter-Pluto conjunction really important is that it comes 3 times within 1 year because of retrogression. And that really doesn't happen very often. Usually, Jupiter moves really fast. And usually Jupiter will make only 1 conjunction with Pluto. But in 2020, Jupiter made 3 conjunction with Pluto. This is the second one in June 30th. And again, you can see Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn, also in square to Uranus. So the revolutionary, so that era of Uranus, Pluto, now we have Jupiter, Saturn. And, that conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn with Pluto, so that's June 30th. Then the next one is November 13, 2020. Now we have Jupiter, Pluto, and then Saturn has moved back into Capricorn, and they're all really, really close. So I don't know what wave of, and we identify, the crisis as coronavirus, but there are a lot more deeply felt factors in this crisis. We choose to focus on that, but the environmental crisis, the socio-political crisis, and the economic challenges that we face throughout this whole time, it's a multifaceted crisis. And again, this is something that's been building for quite a while, as that's Jupiter, that Uranus Pluto square has been going. So now you see in November 13, Uranus and Pluto are no longer in square. So Uranus is starting to move far ahead. But then we have the maxima conionctio. So the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction happens every 20 years. And in the olden times, it was associated with the death of the king, with the major social changes. So Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in conjunction with Pluto, that is very unusual. We have to go back to the 1960s and to the 1940s to find similar, but really that the maxima conionctio happens in conjunction with Pluto, that Jupiter makes 3 conjunction with Pluto, and that Saturn, that initial Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that really, when we looked at it from before leading to this 2020, we knew 2020 is going to be, quite the year. And so then December 16, 2020, that's when Jupiter and Saturn together ingress into Uranus and that into Aquarius, and that's when the exact conjunction of Jupiter Saturn happens, and that's in square to Uranus. And so that's the shift of the year. And then we get into January 18th. So now we have a Jupiter, Uranus, Mars square. That's very, very significant. And this whole thing here, and again, that's a very tense time in the collective. And then we have the beginning of what we see as the Saturn Uranus square. So been going through a lot of information. So by February 18th, then we have the Saturn Uranus square. Now on my video channel, I have a video called the Saturn Uranus cycle in our times. And in that video, I look at the last full 2 cycles of Saturn and Uranus. So I go back to the 1930s and I look at every engagement that Saturn and Uranus have made together leading to now. And it tells a very interesting story. And I also deal in detail with the archetypal structure of Uranus and Saturn. Now, Uranus, we talked about it as the sky god. Now, in mythology, Saturn overthrows Uranus to become the king of the god, and he does so by castrating Uranus. So Saturn being about control and about, being conservative, Uranus being about emancipation and revolution. Whenever we see Saturn and Uranus in angle, there's a certain castration of the Uranian principle, the Saturnian control over the Uranus revolutionary. And so in 2021, we see 3 exact square of Saturn and Uranus. And again, if you're interested into that archetypal structure, I have a whole video on that. And just message me and I can give you all that information. Also, what's important, astrology is about, actually, I'll finish this year here, and then we're going to take a break, but I'll make that comment then. But so that's February 18th is the first, and Mercury's turning retrograde. And so, and you can see that Jupiter, Saturn, Mercury retrograde and square to Uranus, but the Pluto Uranus square, it's not going on anymore. And then June 15th, then we have Saturn Uranus exact square. That's a very interesting chart with the Sun, Moon, Pluto, finger of God. Pluto continues to play a very important role, but we have the second, and that's, I don't know which wave this is, but it's quite amazing to see that from the Jupiter, Pluto, and the Saturn, and then the Saturn Uranus, we kind of have blow by blow the tensions that are taking place as the waves of the crisis come. So now we have a very, very, objective perspective and an astrological perspective of the crisis. And the last chart, we have December 24, 2021. So this is just a few weeks ago, a month ago. And now a month ago, we have the last of the Saturn Uranus square exact. And again, we have an intensification, between the June, and then after June, we have an intensification of the crisis, and then things mellowed out as Saturn Uranus, because of retrograde, we're moving apart. But then by December, here we are again. And what made this particular holiday season really intense is we had Venus retrograde in conjunction with Pluto twice. We had Mercury Pluto conjunction. It was a very, very challenging time. And then now we're into that Saturn Uranus again. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so, all right. So we went through the first two parts. Now we have 2021 to look at. That's kind of a real rapid view of the season, that, you know, what we've been going through. I hope this wasn't all too fast, and I hope you guys got to grab some of it. We're going to take a break now. It's 8 o'clock. We'll come back in 10 minutes.
Thank you.
So, blah, 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 blah. So we were discussing a little bit. We didn't really take a break. We kept on talking. And it's very difficult to know who's tuning in and who's not. So I'm not even going to try because it doesn't happen. So I really like what we talked about with Alan there and with Leah about, you know, well, you know, we become familiar with these archetypal structures. And then for those of you who've seen my work and who become familiar with my work for some time, you know, these are not new things. You know, I've been talking about this and we've been talking about this for a long time. So now we're coming to look at what 2022 looks like. And we're just at the beginning. And, you know, in commenting on these times, and one of the most difficult things that you have to do as an astrologer is to try to remain objective and not to just become completely subjective about your interpretation, because you may see it this way, you know, you may see it this way, but truth, you know, I like what the Jung says about truth. He says, you know, truth is a paradox, you know, if for a truth to be absolutely true, the opposite also has to be true. And that's a difficult thing for us to do. Huh? It's not to be so one-sided. In when we look at what truth is a paradox. So like in this crisis, if one of the big problems that we have, and we have that on both sides, is we think our side is true, right? But the truth resides somewhere in the middle, and to remain objective in how we make our interpretation of what's ahead, it's really difficult, but also it brings some very interesting lines. So I've done 7 charts. Now I have 14 charts to show you. So get you guys your chart reading skills. Okay, deuces are wild. So why did I choose that? And deuces are wild. And 2, you know, the number 2, Jung submits the number 2 to quite a alchemical study. And the number 2 in old times were associated with the devil. And it's the confrontation of opposites. And so in a sense, I think that this confrontation of opposite is really going to unfold in 2022. And we have a lot of 2s. You know, we have February 22nd. That's going to be the most 2s we're going to see. We're also going to see December 22nd. That's the most 2s in a date we're going to see till 2020, till 2222, really, which is in 200 years from now. And so that's really, you know, and that confrontation of opposites, and the confrontation, in a sense, we're not quite done. And what you'll also find is that we're also not done with the Saturn Uranus square. So we start January 2nd. And so we have that Venus Pluto conjunction that just happened. And we have that Saturn Uranus square still really active. And then January 31st, we have Sun Moon, Saturn, Uranus in square. So the new moon is right on Saturn, Uranus. Now all fall on when the new moon in Scorpio, we had new moon in Scorpio and opposite to Uranus in square Saturn, so we could see this tension. And now we're seeing it again. And then we have a Mercury, Venus. So this is just in a week. This is the next new moon. I started a new playlist on my YouTube channel. It's called Sol y Luna Inspirations. And it's a half-hour show on each new moon and full moon. Subscribe to that. And we're going to follow those new moons and full moons as they go along. But here we go. So that's, and then we get into March. And this is a very unique chart, two very unique chart. Not busy at all, huh? And then we have Mercury, Saturn, and we still have the square. Anytime the line is really thin, that means the angle is wide. If the line is really thick, that means the angle is almost exact. So if you look back here, the Saturn Uranus is thick. Saturn Uranus is thick. So then by the time we come into March, the Saturn Uranus has lightened up quite a bit. And then we have the dominating aspect of, or the dominating astrological feature of spring is the Jupiter Neptune conjunction. Here we have a Jupiter Moon Sun conjunction, and by the full moon everything is going to be triggering, and then we have the growing conjunction of Jupiter Neptune. A lot of people say that's really positive. It feels really good. You got both rulers of Pisces enjoy, coming into a conjunction with each other. Really quite powerful. Very Piscean. Neptune and Pisces is really challenging because it's really easy to give up your power and to just want to merge into everybody. Big factor of what's been going on. And then Jupiter in Pisces is like the great teacher, huh? So Jupiter Neptune, it's a great spiritual teacher, but it's also a great dissociation from what so we're going to get to see that, and that'll be very interesting, that Jupiter. And then another factor that makes March really important is this Venus Mars Pluto triple conjunction that's almost exact. And that's going to be challenging, and that's going to grow. That grows all throughout fall, and you can see it if you look at it a little bit earlier. You can see Mars. You can see, well, in January, Mars is still in Sagittarius, but then here now, on the 31st, it's coming closer to Venus, and Mars and Venus travel together. And then March. So, what did I do here? Okay. So then March 2nd, Mars, Venus, Pluto. So Mars and Venus, the conjunction of Mars and Venus are associated with relationships. Pluto, death and rebirth. I foresee that the psychological impact of the crisis has really affected relationship greatly. And we're going to have some real challenges in this Mars-Venus. We had a Mars-Venus conjunction in the summer in Leo. And as Venus, Mars come together, they continue together, they will come to Saturn and form a triple conjunction with Saturn in opposition to the last Venus-Mars conjunction of the summer. And that's very unique. And so what happened this summer, will inform greatly what this winter is going to look like. And here we are, March 31st, Mars, Venus, Saturn, triple conjunction. And then you see Jupiter, Neptune. And then you have Mercury, Moon, Chiron. And that's very difficult to really see through in terms of what that's going to feel like. Of course, that's in square to Uranus. And to me, the crisis is really, when it comes down to it, it's really a spiritual crisis. It's a spiritual and moral crisis, where that's shaking the very foundation and exposing the lack of connection with spirit and the lack of moral judgment that's fair. And that's on both sides of the issues. We kind of, and so these issues, my sense is they're going to feel itself out. And in that February, March window there, that's going to make for, so that Jupiter, Neptune, a lot of people are also talking about Jupiter, Neptune being big storms and flooding, Jupiter, Neptune. And so that's going to be very interesting to witness. But that's the charts. And then let's see what's next. Okay, we're still in April. And then in April, we have the full moon. The full moon is in a T-square with Pluto. Jupiter, Neptune. So what date is that? Well, no. I'm not. I don't know what I did. I hope I didn't screw anything up. Anyway, I wanted to see the date there, but I think that's the 15th. And then you have that. So now Jupiter, Neptune is exact, and you have that T-square, and you have Mercury, Uranus. That's going to be fascinating. Mercury, Uranus is genius. Jupiter, Neptune, and a T-square with Pluto. So, I don't think I think that the tense, what I see is that the tension that we've been going through is going to become more of an inner process of understanding the lessons of the past. But I don't know, that Jupiter Neptune thing is really interesting. That T-square with Pluto, so very difficult to be, to kind of put an exact judgment on it. But for sure, a lot going on in the early months of the year. Then April 30th, we have a Jupiter-Venus conjunction. Jupiter, Neptune, Venus. My Venus is right here. So any late planets in Pisces, that feels fairy tale like, very, so falling in love or some, beautiful. And then we have that Sun, Moon, Uranus, Saturn square, like we saw at the beginning of winter. Again, now we saw it at the beginning of winter, Saturn and Sun and Moon and Saturn here in square to Uranus. Now it's the opposite. So that narrative is still there, but that Jupiter, Neptune, Venus, that could be really sweet. So we could have a real beautiful, flowery kind of spring. And then things get a little bit more intense because now Here we are. This is May 15th. And Saturn, Uranus, Moon, Mercury, T-square again. And then Mars, Jupiter, Neptune. So we had Venus, Jupiter, Neptune. So then now in May, we have Mars, Jupiter, Neptune. And we have on May 30th, a Mars, Jupiter conjunction in Aries. That's very fiery and, and very aggressive. And then, Saturn, Uranus is really small. So that'll be very interesting. And then blah, blah, blah. Where are we now? April, May, and then summer. Okay, so look at this now. July 28th, Mars, Uranus, Saturn, Mercury, with Sun, Moon in opposition to Pluto. And now we have Pluto, Uranus, and trine. Now we're starting to see some very different alignments. This Uranus, Uranus, Pluto trine is going to be with us for the next 6 years, 5 years. I got some notes about that, and then we're going to see that that's going to become more of an issue. But by July and definitely by August, now Saturn is back in orb of Uranus. In August, we have a sun, moon. So a full moon in Aquarius with a conjunction with Saturn and Mars, Uranus. So this Uranus, so we had 4 squares of Saturn, Uranus. We had 3 in 2021, and then we have 1 in 2022. It doesn't become exact, but they stay within 1 degree of each other for a full 2 months, even more than that. This is August, and already they're in alignment. Whether we're going to see another wave of the C word, or whether now this is a full-blown social crisis, revolutionary crisis. There's bound to be a pushback. I think that this last square of Uranus, Pluto, again, we'll have to see how it plays out. And as the end of summer comes, keep that in mind. If you're interested in these more studies, I have all of these charts and I can send them to you easily as a PDF. And I have every full moon and every new moon in one PDF that I can send you for your own studies. And then we get into September.
Martin.
Yes.
So charts, yes, but also providing what does that mean, right? So as we can see those dances moving around and gaining strength, and just wondering maybe
well,
conversation later.
Let me finish the year, and then then we can get into it more.
What does it mean? Yes, great, perfect, thanks.
Into the meaning of it all.
Yes.
So coming to September, we have Sun, Venus, Mercury, Sun, Moon, Venus, Mercury in opposition to Jupiter, Neptune. Now we started to see this is what's really exciting, and we're going to learn to define this a lot more. So at the beginning of the talk, we talked about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, this is the first of these. But as 2023 comes, and by 2025, this Pluto, Neptune, Uranus triangle will be exact, and Saturn will be in conjunction. And also what's going on is Pluto is getting ready to move in Aquarius, Neptune into Aries, and Uranus into Gemini. And so now we're getting a preview. So by September, we're going to get into a preview of what 2023, 2024, 25, 26, probably even 27. This angle, this little triangle there, that's the dominating aspect for the next little while. And we'll get into, again, I hear you covered all, I kind of got to go through the material. I only have a couple more charts. And then this triangle there is in a grand trine and what we call a grand kite with the Sun, Moon, Venus, Mercury, Jupiter, Neptune. We're going to see that again in October. That triangle is still there. And then these last, and then November, again, we have Moon, Uranus, Saturn, Sun, Mercury, Venus. And then by December 23rd, to me, it looks like we're going to have a nice Christmas. We have Sun, Moon, Jupiter, Neptune, and the Uranus, Saturn has gone, but also that triangle is gone. And so that comes into 2023. I have some interesting notes, but yeah, what does that all mean? So yes, what does that all mean? So it's 8:30. We got about a half-hour discussion, and I got some notes that I wanted to share with you about what's ahead. So the Saturn Uranus still active through winter and through next fall. That's one thing. And what does that mean? A lot of what we've been going through Saturn Uranus wise is going to be, continuing its effect. So I don't think we're free of that in 2022. The Jupiter Neptune thing is really important. That's going to be on all year long. Jupiter moves into Aries and conjuncts with Mars. That's going to be very telling. It's going to be very enthusiastic, socially very engaging. And then the other thing that we can talk about is, and then I'm going to give you my notes for that. My notes for that are here. So, so the Pluto moving into Aquarius, the last time Pluto was in Aquarius was during the French and the American Revolution. When Neptune was in Aries, 1860, the American Civil War and the Confederation of Canada, and atrocities that were done to the native people really began around that time. Uranus in Gemini, 1930s and the 1940s. So then we have Pluto enters Aquarius in March 2023. Saturn enters Pisces in 23. Neptune enters Aries in 2025. Uranus enters Gemini in 2025. And then we have Saturn, Neptune conjunction, sextile Pluto, that triangle that we locked at the end there, that's 2025. And then that's what we're going to end the show with. Stop share. So that was a lot. Any questions do we have? Or so Leah, you were asking, what does it mean? So do you have any questions on anything in particular?
Right. No, I'm just thinking for maybe for those that aren't as familiar with the archetypes of all those pieces and how those players start to dance on that table, what kind of dance that might look like. Are we talking jive, salsa, tango? You know, like if we're just looking for, I am just looking for what's some examples? And I love how you've laid out the correlation to past historical events. And so what I'm sort of seeing is a resurgence of the 60s, a resurgence of the 30s, a resurgence of the, you know, so if we look to those events, giving that they're the same sort of alignments, is that what we're expecting, I guess?
Well, the Saturn Uranus
I see your
influence throughout the year will continue to bring the same tension that we've seen.
Mhm.
The Jupiter Neptune is going to bring a lot of enthusiasm and mysticism and a lot of connection with spirit. I think that really by now we figured out, and I think some of, you know, we're starting to figure out that the only way we're going to pull out of the crisis is by developing a more balanced outlook, but also, you know, the way we dealt with the crisis is with no spiritual assets whatsoever.
Right.
You know, it became a completely empowering of the scientific model with, you know, shutting down all the churches and, you know, and shutting down everything that has anything to do with spirit. You know, it was really, really, really challenging, and it made us really hungry for that. And I think that it also pushed us through psychologically. I think, you know, if we're pulling out of this in any healthy kind of way, we're realizing how important our spiritual practice is.
Mhm.
And so Jupiter Neptune is going to be really good for that. But there's a shadow to Jupiter Neptune as well. So the Saturn, so the two main things that we're going to see is that Saturn Uranus coming back. Well, we're going to still feel it in the fall. I mean, in the winter, come into fall, into spring, that Jupiter Neptune's going to really, I think to me, is going to be really beautiful. And a kind of, you know, you almost kind of feel, you know, a return to spiritual community, you know. And then the Mars Jupiter, very active, very energetic, you know. And then the Jupiter Neptune Mars conjunction, that can be, you know, so that could be challenging, you know. So I don't, you know, it's, you know, so when you look at something like that, you got to look at the shadow of it, and you got to look at the light of it.
So
One of the things that I see a lot of is natural disasters and a change of the narrative to becoming more concerned about the environment.
Mhm.
Versus, you know, this distraction that we've been through, and a shifting to the real issues of our time. I think the psychological suffering, you know, that we've been through, we need to find a panacea for that.
Mhm.
I think that Jupiter Neptune will really help with that. And I think that, you know, beginning of summer is going to be quite nice, but again, I've been seeing this all along, is that the issues of the Saturn Uranus will become real Saturn Uranus issues. Saturn Uranus issues are political issues, and Saturn and Uranus. So, you know, to give you some idea, Saturn and Uranus were in conjunction in 1942.
Mhm.
You know, Saturn and Uranus were in conjunction in 1988.
Yeah.
And the next conjunction of Saturn Uranus is 2032. The Saturn Uranus conjunction of 1942 was in Gemini. the Saturn Uranus conjunction of 2032 is also in Gemini.
Mhm.
There's all kinds of very interesting correlation. Also, the shifting of Pluto into Aquarius is major,
Mhm.
and that feels really revolutionary and very, this is a change. Pluto in Scorpio, I mean in Capricorn is Pluto in an earth sign, Pluto in an air sign. I think we're going to be much more politically engaged, much more, that's going to bring a lot of change. And then Neptune going into Aries is going to be also much, much different. And so my sense is that 2022 is going to be a prelude to the big changes that are going to happen in 2023, 24, and 25. And we're going to get some indication of of what that's going to look like. And to me, the narrative's going to change to what the real problems that we're facing. And there's socio-political problems and environmental problems, which, and political, I was also in my meditations and in my studies, I was, because the state of Canada and what how we're approaching so conservatively this this crisis, in how other countries like the States and even England and even Europe are there's a lot more pushback. There's some pushback here, but Canada has never had a revolution.
We're too young.
Canada,
Yeah.
has just taken
Mhm.
the rules of the Queen. We still, our lands, we don't call them native lands, we call them crown land.
Yeah.
The land still belongs to the Queen. How patriarch, how we're talking about colonialism, and how to get rid of it. And then all the lands are in control of the crown still. So I see us as Canadians waking up a little bit more, and I see some pushback that that Jupiter Mars is going to be very interesting.
Great.
And then what I'm really curious with is when late summer and spring, where that Uranus, Pluto, Neptune. At the beginning of the lecture, we talked about the Uranus Neptune conjunction. We talked about the square of Uranus Pluto. So now you have an angular relationship that's going to be current for us for the next 4 to 5 years, and the exact alignment of those three planets is 2025, summer of 2025.
Building. Yeah.
So I see that as a real key. And I think that the atmosphere that we're going through and the challenges that we're facing, I'm probably not going to see a resolution of it till 2032, when the next Saturn Uranus conjunction comes. And and if we look again at the last two Saturn Uranus conjunction, the Saturn Uranus conjunction 1988 was a very important socio-political time. And 1942 also a real time of dire change and a pushback. That's the Americans got into the war shortly after that. And so I think that we're becoming, I think 2022, again, if we take that, the binarius, the number two, the confrontation of the opposites, I think that 2022 will offer more of a balanced perspective, in that the clash of the two will become more evident. So
Before we
yeah,
So I want to, sorry to interrupt Flo, but
no problem.
Renan and Sunita both had questions. So
Please.
I think it was Renan first and Sunita next. Yes, thank you. Go for it. You're able to unmute, Renan?
Yes, here I am. So the American astrologers on the internet are have got their panties in a twist about the Pluto return, and they're making the big point that the Pluto conjunction was the Civil War, and the Pluto opposition was World War II or whatever. And so I don't want to see the whole thing through the lens of American culture. I'm glad that you mentioned the Canadians, because we are sort of we have an opportunity to not see ourselves through the lens of the Americans. And I'd like to get your recommendations on how to do that.
Wow, that's a loaded question, isn't it? How can we not see ourselves as American? You know, if we look at history, you know, and if we look at that time where Pluto was last into Capricorn, and when Pluto moved into Aquarius the last time, that was the American Revolution and the French Revolution. And those are really, really important times, you know, in the evolution of the modern mind, you know, that, you know, Jung looks at that time as the beginning of the Enlightenment, you know, and what, you know, he looks at the impact at the one of the chapters in the French Revolution, when they overthrew the you know, and when the revolution was complete, they did a parade where they disguised the goddess of reason, and they went into the church of Notre Dame, and they kicked out Mary, and they put the goddess of reason in her place. And Jung calls that moment in time the beginning of the age of the Enlightenment, or where we kicked out the goddess out of the church, and we put reason, we put science, we put rationalism in its place. And so that's a really important point. But also, you know, from the perspective of being Canadians, you know, that war that took place at that time, where, you know, and it went on for quite a while, that conflict, even after the Declaration of Independence, the British didn't quit. And their main place of action was you know, from Canada. And that's, you know, and all the loyalists came to Canada. And so, you know, this allegiance to the British flag, and this allegiance, you know, it's a, you know, and to this day, this conflict with the Americans, and the Canadians still looking down, you know, at the Americans, and the way the American spirit is, you know, they fought, you know, and then 100 years later, they fought another war within themselves, you know, and so, you know, and so an American approaches a conflict in a much different way than a Canadian will. You know, and for those who spent a lot of time, I spent 20 years in the state, and I think some of that rubbed on us, but also on me, but also being a French Canadian, and our experience of what the Trudeaus were. And, you know, when I was 12 years old, I had a soldier with a machine gun on my street corner, and we had curfews, you know, so there's a real, you know, so we want to separate ourselves from the Americans, but really our history is intertwined, and whatever happens down south, you know, it will you know, will have great effects over here. But you know, that we're still very much loyalists to a colonial empire makes it very difficult for us. You know, our systems are ingrained in colonialism. And so, you know, what we saw in this Saturn Uranus period is we saw a pushback, you know, a real need to empower native culture. And you know, when we started seeing the graves, you know, we started noticing how evil, you know. And I lived in the interior of BC, and when you know, in 1860, when the gold people came in, you know, and what they did to the native people, in what we've done to the native people. We are confronted with national shame that is, we point the finger at others. And so I think that these kind of issues, and I think that we can hide and look at ourselves to be more morally superior in a sense, but actually, if we look at ourselves in the mirror and look at our history in the mirror, we're confronted with quite a bit of darkness. And I think that that will continue to become an issue. And I think that we have to be very diligent as Canadians to make sure that we are held accountable and that our government is held accountable for what it has done. And so I think that that's going to be, I don't know if I answered your question well here. I went into a digression. Did that make sense to you though, Renan?
That makes sense, of course.
How do you feel about that?
I feel it rings true. And I still desire the objectivity to look at the Americans, to look at the Chinese, to get out of the geopolitical binary, like you were talking about a big binary.
Right.
We're generating a geopolitical thing where the Chinese and the Americans are the new binary, right? So that seems, like a connection that the 22 is going to make for us.
Yes. I think that these are the kind of issues that have been building up as the Uranus Pluto square was evolving. And I think that that is those kinds of issues that you're discussing that we really need to engage with. And to be more, I think the way I look at it is if we want things to change, we have to engage. And if we don't engage, then we're going to be stuck with what's the new reality, the new normal. If we don't engage, we're going to be stuck with it. And so a political engagement, a social engagement to redress, I think from what I see in my readings and what I see with the work that what I do with individuals is that we're dealing with a reckoning of our ancestral rage. Our ancestors have risen up against us and they're saying, if you don't deal with this shit, we're going to really continue to, this kind of psychological disturbance that we're all going through. To me, it's ancestral in basis. Our ancestors need redemption. We need to change the patterns and to me, that's what this crisis is about. And just like to go back to Jung, that's what he saw also, is that we have chosen to go on a path of rampant materialism. And now we need to change our course. And the only way we're going to change our course is if big catastrophes like what we're going through, environmental and this virus, which is really work of nature. So to me, that's what it means to change in the age of Aquarius. And these are the changes that are going on. Anyway, it's hard to be enthusiastic about the future, really, unless we have the courage to deal with these things.
I have a question.
Sure.
Okay. Can I ask Catherine?
Yes.
Sunita's been waiting for quite a while.
Sorry. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. Okay. I'll mute.
No worries. I will grab you in just a sec. Yeah.
If Catherine had a question relevant to what Martin just said, I'm okay to wait.
Okay. Catherine, is it right on top of what we were just talking about?
Well, yes, it was kind of related, but it's all related. I just wanted to ask Martin, do you see the collective consciousness or the unconsciousness or changing slowly, like through the next year? Are we just on the verge of you know, perhaps evolving into a different, an awareness of our consciousness and the dark sides and you know, and coming out through from the dark side sort of into some enlightenment. Do you see that?
Absolutely, absolutely. This was Catherine?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay, absolutely. But I've been seeing this in personal work ever since, the early part of the second decade. We've all been going through a tremendous amount of struggles psychologically. The psyche, our inner psyches have been in turmoil. We are well aware of this split between this dissociation, or what Jung calls this one-sidedness, and that it, do I see it happening? I see it as a essential factor in things changing, but I don't see much commitment, from people to actually make that change. We are going to have to suffer a lot more before we can see the necessity to integrate the shadow. But yes, it is the solution, is to do the shadow work, to get yourself a good Jungian analyst, and to get yourself, a good creative and spiritual practice, and to be the change that you want to see. It's essential. And it can't be, a superficial, or what I call the sublimated spiritual practice. You got to get down to the dark parts of the psyche, and you got to do the dirty work. And by doing that, then you get a sense of power and empowerment in it. And the more of us do that, the more things will change. But if we think change will happen, without my contribution to me being the change, then no, I don't see that. And so I see great potential in the future, but I also am very concerned because of this lack of commitment that we have to developing spiritual practices. Who's next?
Sam, does that answers Catherine? You're good with that? Yeah.
Did I work for you, Catherine?
Yeah, yes, and it answers my question. But I also feel that nature and all the events that are taking place around nature is also making humanity and we as people more aware, and perhaps more into being more conscious about our role in how we can change. Well, that's all I wanted to say. Yeah.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. And for sure, yes, yes, we're all in this together, and Mother Nature really needs us to. And to me, that's what spirit, that's what the spiritual practice is. It's learning to reconnect with Mother Nature and the rhythms of nature, and living in harmony with them. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Sunita, and then Christine. Thanks.
Hi, Martin. This is Sunita. And it was quite an enlightening lecture for me. Being a very nascent learner of astrology, I could kind of weave a thread on the different events that India witnessed for us, along with the charts that were put up. I'm very drawn to what you spoke about the Jupiter and Neptune in an aspect. And it kind of validated also for me, I think part of my query you already answered, which is it being a spiritual crisis, which seems to be quite out there. And the disillusionment that I think I associate with the Neptune kind of an energy. And I was just wondering how you look at when Neptune moves from its house of rulership, which it's in Pisces now, to moving into Aries, which is a very fiery kind of a sign. I'm just wondering what it would bring for us, because I do see that Neptune and Jupiter kind of can create both an expansion of seeking the spirit, the imaginal, and the shadow of what you spoke about, not having that commitment to really act on it and be lost in some way. So that was my question.
I must be honest with you, and thank you for such a beautiful question. And are you joining us from India, or you're in North America?
Yes.
You are. How are things in India with the crisis, and how are you feeling it there?
I think we are almost in the midst of a third wave presently, because we have we have people down all around, but the intensity of what is experienced, though it's expanded, it's not intense in terms of people being able to heal and get back on their feet faster. So, but we are in the mode of a slight lockdown. Still things are not back.
Right. I'm curious about I'm curious about the socio-political situation and what has happened with the farmers, and and how they fought back, and the change.
Yes.
How has that affected the country?
It has affected the country positively, because the farmers were able to have a say and the government had to pull back. But the underlying political scenario is also that we have elections around the corner. So now the whole political, the government, the authorities are, very tentative and wanting to be in this people-pleasing mode. So both are happening, but there is a shift. We are around it's just around the corner, there's a sense.
And do you find that people are rising against materialism, or do you feel that it's still, because India has gone through quite a bit of change through these times, and what is the what is India wanting to be more spiritual, or is it still working towards this ideal of or the emerging of the middle class in India has been something quite spectacular in the last 20-30 years?
The voices are getting stronger, and there is a huge spiritual rising on one end, but it is being shadowed by the religious forces, because spirituality and religion can be, quite at loggerheads. So there is a firming up of a spiritualistic rising, but it's still, I feel, not there to bring about a shift or a change in the masses, because there's exhaustion, there's this
right
all around.
I think now I can answer your question more clearly, and it's really important, and in answering your question from someone, it's really important to understand what ground they're sitting on. And so what you spoke to and the questions that I asked you, I think that's the essence of that Jupiter Neptune. Whenever we deal with Jupiter, though, Jupiter is a very tricky god, you know, and we have to look at mythology and how, you know, Saturn overthrew Uranus and then Jupiter overthrew Saturn. And then Jupiter became the king god, you know, Zeus, the king of the gods, and our culture is very Jupiterian. Jupiter is a very you know, he's optimistic, he's great, but he's also doesn't really want to be held accountable. You know, he will, you know, he's always having to justify his abuse to his wife because he's always chasing around, you know, for relationships, and so Jupiter, to me, is very. It's become more shadow in our culture. I almost look now at Saturn being, you know, because in the past Saturn was the devil and Jupiter was the god. And now it's almost like we can see Saturnian values as being more valuable than Jupiterian values. And we saw that in the Jupiter Pluto, the three conjunctions. To me, you know, Jupiter, we'd like to think ourselves to be, it's inflational, you know. We think of ourselves to be great teacher, you know, I am great teacher. You know, I spent 10 years in the Hare Krishna movement, so I'm quite, I spent some time in India as well. And so the Jupiterian archetype would like us to think that we're great. And Neptune, you know, Neptune, Jupiter is I think the danger is to think, like you were saying, you know, of really thinking that my spiritual dimension or my spiritual belief is so great, you know. And so I think, you know, and what we've seen with Pisces, with Neptune and Pisces, the veil to the unconscious and to the realm of spirit is very close. But we would rather get high than to actually go and do the work, you know. And so that's the negative side, you know. So then you look at Jupiter, Neptune feels really good in terms of like really great inspiration, but you could just, you know, fly off into like, you know, and become completely inflated about your divinity, you know. So I'm weary of it. But I think that that's one of the great tests that we're having to lead to. And again, you know, the Jupiter Neptune will be very, very short-lived. And then we'll be back into Saturn, Uranus after that. So I think that the demagogues and the ideologues and the, you know, I think that people will really get on their soapbox and be very preachy. You know, there's going to be like, you know, and we're going to see the politicians becoming inflated with that. You know, we had all of yours interest in mind, you know, so I think that, so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I think that a real Saturnian, Neptunian, so what we're going to see is Saturn will come into Pisces, and then when we see that that Saturn, we're going to see a Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, Pluto, and then Jupiter will meet Uranus. So that's 2025. I think we're working towards some great shifts there, but like Catherine was saying, you know, not being, you know, not thinking ourselves too big, to actually being connected with spirit in a humble way, and to be devoted to my practice, and to be devoted with what I'm doing in my own work and being the example. But that's not Jupiterian, that's not Jupiter Neptune. Jupiter Neptune can feel like a really big party, you know, everybody, you know, the sun being shining and everybody getting out there. And so I don't know, we'll see it for sure. I hope that was useful.
Thank you. Yes, Martin, it really spoke to me, I think. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing. Please do connect and stay with us. Okay, our nice. Any other question? I know Kristen had her hand up.
Christine's in next. Yeah, that's it, Christine.
Hi. So much has transpired now. I don't know what I want to even ask, but I'm just going to give you some broad strokes. In the inflation part really spoke to me. And I guess what I'm looking at is the geopolitical situation with Russia and the Ukraine, and in a very sort of obscure way, that Biden, is he not being as overinflated as anybody else? And, you know, that's where I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they were giving their perspective, and I really got upset. And it was really about, you know, Russia-Ukrainian situation. They're not really the bad guys. And really, if you understand it from a historical perspective of Russia being as insecure as anybody else, wanting to have a safe demilitarized zone, and for portions of the Ukraine wanting to go to the EU, is sending horrible alarm messages for Russia as a nation. And that this might, you know, with Biden's approach, cause great repercussions that would push Russia to align with China. And all of that on the surface, you know, when I think about it, my reaction was very, I found it very distressing to hear. And yet when I reflected upon it, I thought, geez, you know, it's all part and parcel of the same thing, isn't it? I mean, it's really good guys, bad guys. And really, to overcome these things, we have to stop thinking in these, these dualistic kind of ways. They don't serve us. And how it reflects to the inner work, Martin, is I guess also very much the same. And the reactivity that we have in situations that are very difficult. Therein lies the lesson. And
well, I think that anybody, you know, like I made a little sentence, you know, if you're overly optimistic about the times ahead, you're kind of delusional. And if you're overly pessimistic about the times ahead, then you're not doing the work, you know. And I think that to be realistic about the times that we face, and to realize that we as a culture are in deep trouble and we need to do the work, and then to let our work speak for us, I think it's absolutely essential. But geopolitically, you know, we've been, you know, and the situation with China and what Russia's going through, and what Europe is like right now, and what the poor countries are going through right now. Oh my God, we have no news of that. But you know what Africa and where you know where the real challenges are, you know, where you know, I think that we're seeing, you know, our world kind of crumble in front of us. And yes, it is kind of the human nature that things get bad, we start a war, and that's certainly what the Americans do. And so I think that there's going to be a test there, big test. I think that yes, I think anybody has to be concerned about the points that you're made, and yeah, it's kind of sobering. But to also go back to a part of the question that I didn't answer in Sunita's question about what the Neptune in Aries, what's that going to feel like? You know, going from a very passive, very mystical Neptune in Pisces, going to a Neptune in Aries, that's a deep, deep shift of energy. That's the religious warrior, that is, that Neptune in Aries, and then Pluto in Aquarius, Pluto from Earth sign into an air sign, and then Uranus from Taurus to another air sign, and then that triple connection in masculine signs, in air and fire. My sense is that we're about to shift into a much, much more fiery time. And it's hard to see, that what we've been through is not fiery. But I think that, looking at those alignments, and also, from being, on the other side of the ledger where, my life and our lives have been committed to making change, in our lives and in the way we live our lives, to look at what's going on and to look at how people are blindly running into a future without knowing what is ahead for them. And I think that that's what's being seen in the psychological crisis that so many people are going through. People know deep down that we're coming into some very, very difficult times. And to me, that's the psychological nature of this disease, is actually a psychological projection of something much deeper inside of us. It's kind of like our materialism. We're coming to a time of reckoning where we're going to have to pay the bill, and the bill is due, and it's not going to be so pretty, I think. And I think we're all feeling that. And so I know I feel it in people in one-to-one work, that the inner tension is so strong, and everybody is so close to full on breakdown, that something is going on. But again, it's really difficult not to be, subjective about this. And I want to be as objective as I can, but I find it difficult to be enthusiastic about the future. That was a little somber.
No, I'm just looking at the chat here. Luke says, a bit random, but why does Pluto continually get thought of as not a planet, especially when it has such influence? I'll add. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's my friend Luke. Luke and I are doing some work online. We did this essay together, The Undiscovered Self. We have 10 hours of videos, the whole essay in a discussion. So hi, Luke, and thank you for your question. Why does, so symbolically, because that's the only way to answer such a question. Symbolically, why do people not want to do the shadow work? And that's what it would mean to me, is that people really don't want to face the ancestral rage. And in the work, it's, because as an astrologer, that's what you do, you look at the ancestral rage, and you look at how it's affecting you, and that's how it's affecting you psychologically, and how your ancestral rage is where your psychological complexes are born from, your mommy issues, your daddy issues, all of these that neurosis and that latent psychosis, it's born in your ancestors. It's really deep. And when you talk about that, people go, oh, that's a little too intense, and so there's a fear there, and Jung talks about it all the time in his work that, we don't want to do the shadow work. And so then, yeah, Pluto is not a planet. I don't have to do my shadow work. I hope that answers that one.
Denial, denial, denial. Yes, such a.
It's far out now. It's 9:20 and we only lost 4 people, still 27 people online with us.
And we're still going. But I am going to bring it to a close, unless there's a burning question sitting there. I'm not seeing hands. I'll hold my breath here if you want to jump in. Anyone? Much to think about for sure. Much.
I didn't want to be really, so this is my contact. If you want to contact with me, my email address, my YouTube channel.
That's what I was calling for. Yep, perfect.
If creativity is a fire, I'm your biggest fan. That's, and I didn't want to be, overly negative. I think that we have to be concerned, but that is the motivation that we have to use to do our work, to do our inner work, and to become the change that we want to see in the world.
Yes.
And it's real, and we're all being called to do that. And if we do that work, then we can see a spiritual revolution take place in our times.
That's right.
And
will.
that's what it's about.
We're not.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Wonderful. And thank you so much once again for putting up the stained glass on the windows, for putting them all in there and giving us something to both gaze through and engage with, right? So having those lenses is so important, and I really appreciate. I'm getting lots of right on. Thank you. Appreciating that. Thank you, Martin. Thank you. So grateful for your insights. So much to think about. Yes. So we all just are really grateful again. A lovely evening. Thank you for your gifts, for sharing your gifts with us. Be sure to contact Martin. All his email is also on our website as well. And he does readings. If you want to take the collective conversation into an individual, personal journey, that's a very wise thing to do as well. Start your journey, start the work. There's another one. This is the 3rd lecture that Monk has attended, and he is only 5 years old. Okay, we're starting them young. Good on you. Good on you. Good on you. Yeah, good on you.
Well, we with the Monk started. It was just a little baby, and Luke and I would be talking about these things together. So yes, Monk is definitely going to follow in our footsteps.
Great, beautiful. Yes, we'll need some of that youthful insight and freshness, I think, to bring us into a perhaps alternative view other than the polarization that we seem to be so stuck in. Exhausting word. Yeah, Sunita mentioned it. I think that's the word of the day, exhaustion. So, and on that note, I'm going to wrap this up and stop the recording. And thank you so much for all of you, and for you, Martin. Thank you, each of you, for showing up tonight.
Well,
Thank you.
And we'll